Hello everyone, thank you for joining us for this live Q&A. I'm particularly excited for this one. The guest with me here today is Jeff Hansen, who is the Managing Director of Sea Shepherd Australia. I'm really excited to get to have a chat with him and let you all listen in and also ask your questions if you're keen to do so. Throughout this session, you'll be able to use the comments in YouTube to ask questions, so please do make a note in there or ask anything you'd like, and as much as possible I'll put those questions to Jeff as well. So let me introduce Jeff here. Jeff, welcome and thank you very much for this.
Oh, thanks, Joel. It's great to connect with you again, and looking forward to our chat today.
I was hoping, if you don't mind, perhaps just to let people know a little bit your background, I guess an introduction of what you do there at Sea Shepherd.
Yeah, well, there's a short and a long version. I'll try and keep it short. But yeah, I grew up in Melbourne, and my first love was dinosaurs, but as I couldn't have them as pets, it moved to reptiles, and I always thought I'd be a vet working with reptiles or working in Africa helping animals from poachers. But for all the wrong reasons, I did a double degree in electronic engineering and computer science at La Trobe Uni in Bundoora. And it was great. I got to live and work in Germany and America and around the world, but it was slowly eating away at me until one day I saw one of our ships, the Farley Mullet, parked in Melbourne in the Docklands, and went on board for a tour. And what I saw and what I heard changed my life. I heard the words of Paul Watson saying, "This is the most important movement in the world. That is the movement to save life, to save the earth. That means we've got to stand up and fight. And if there's one thing worth fighting for on this planet, it's life." And I saw whales still being killed. I had a knot in my stomach and tears in my eyes, and I'm like, that's it. Don't give any more. I don't want any more Christmas presents or birthday presents. Just give money to this organisation. They were lean, they were effective. And I started volunteering, and next thing I knew, I facilitated the name change of one of our ships to be the Steve Irwin, and I was on the third leg of the 2007-2008 Antarctic Whale Defence Campaign, Operation Migaloo, to defend the whales in the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary from the illegal Japanese whaling fleet. And on the way back to Melbourne, I went into Paul's cabin and suggested a few different ideas on how we could grow Sea Shepherd, and he asked if I'd run it. So I ran it for 2 years as a volunteer and then transitioned out of IT into Sea Shepherd. And it's been a baptism of fire, and it's amazing where the journey has led me and the people I've met and the places I've been.
I wasn't going to guess IT as your background when I asked that question. So one of the things I was planning to ask you, and I'm interested in that, is, we've had difficulty. I've had difficulty when we've looked at charitable organisations that we want to give to, and it's kind of, it's hard to pick. There's a lot of good causes, and I was kind of wondering, like, why Sea Shepherd for you? What got you involved with them? But it sounds like it was a little bit kind of circumstance as much as anything else. Obviously, believing in the cause strongly, but that you happened to be there to encounter it.
Yeah, well, I mean, interesting, Joel. My passion's the Aussie bush. I love being out there in the bush and being amongst the goannas and the kangaroos and the emus and the wombats. That's my love. But through Sea Shepherd, I just learned how important the oceans were, and I kind of really didn't think that we still had whales there. These 40-ton massive leviathans in the sea, and the fact that they were still there. But also through Paul Watson's writings and his speeches, I learned how important our oceans are, and that 2/3 of the air that we breathe comes from our oceans, from phytoplankton, and they regulate our climate, and they're so critically important. And also, I guess, a bit of out of sight, out of mind, the destruction that happens in our oceans. And I just saw this organisation. I've got to put my hand on my heart, and I'm not going to. It's something that my mind works. I follow it down the line, and I look at the way that these guys are operating. It was mostly volunteers on the ships. Most of the money went straight towards, the tangible outcomes that we delivered. And we were realised it was a real passionate bunch that was, a love of the natural world, but a deep understanding of its ecological importance. And, Paul Watson's spaceship Earth analogy really hit home for me. And it was like, that I kind of thought growing up that being a vet was, I realised really it's just a band-aid to help wildlife. Wildlife and animals and nature is fine. We just need to protect the areas that they live, that we just need to get humans out the way. And the spaceship Earth analogy that he mentions, where I was with Paul in Margaret River and a group of school kids, and he said, "Has anyone ever been on a spaceship?" And the kids are like, "Guess what? We're on one right now. This is Spaceship Earth hurtling through space." And like any spaceship, there's the passengers and the crew. The crew run this ship. The insects, the worms, the turtles, the sharks, the whales, the plankton, they regulate our climate. They take care of our waste. They provide us with the food we eat and the air that we breathe. They maintain the life support systems of this planet that we live on, the blue planet. We're just the passengers. We're just here having a good time. The problem is we're killing off the crew. So we've got to protect the crew. And I was like, it makes so much sense. And if everyone understood that, then hopefully one day we don't need conservation groups.
Yep. Now on that, and probably something we should touch on. I know it's a large part of it, but just about like who Sea Shepherd is for any tuning into this that aren't familiar with Sea Shepherd. So the broad mission is saving and protecting the oceans, right?
Yeah, when it was started in 1977 by Paul Watson, he was one of the co-founders of, one of the founding members of Greenpeace. He got kicked out of Greenpeace. They thought he was a bit too radical. So he started Sea Shepherd, and Paul believed that there's all the laws, rules, regulations out there to protect our oceans. What there often is a lack of enforcement. He believed that if someone was being, a dog was being beaten or a woman was being attacked, you didn't stand there and hold a sign. You actually got in and physically intervened. So, and that's sort of been Paul's mandate, with for instance, the Japanese whaling fleet in the Southern Ocean, which, we've been successful in stopping. Governments would talk tough about going down and opposing Japanese whaling, but they wouldn't actually do it. And so there was an established Southern Ocean whale sanctuary. There was a global moratorium on commercial whaling, and no one was down there actively doing it except for, Sea Shepherd physically getting there and blocking their operations. And, with the notion that we'd find the factory whaling ship, the one with the big hole in the back, that was the one that was a bit slower. We could keep up with that. We couldn't keep up with all the harpoon ships, the kill ships. And the notion was that if we chased the factory ship, they would run from us. And if they were running, then they couldn't load dead whales. And if they couldn't load dead whales, they couldn't kill live ones. And that saved over 6,000 whales. And then, the evidence that we provided to the federal court, and then we had the International Court of Justice ruling from the Australian and New Zealand governments, found Japan's whaling to be illegal. And now the Southern Ocean Whale Sanctuary is a sanctuary for the whales. But through that transition, we looked at, the whale defence campaigns took up so much funding, so much resources and so much time. And we looked at, well, what are the key threats to the oceans and what are we actually doing about it? And we identified those key threats as illegal fishing, which accounts for up to 40% of the world's catch in some places. Climate, which we know, the big one, it impacts ocean warming and acidification on our reefs and ecosystems, and even some places oysters can't form their shells because of ocean acidification, which is also going to impact phytoplankton, which give us the air that we breathe and takes carbon. And then plastics, which is now, from the Antarctic to the Arctic to the depths of the ocean, right through the ocean food web. So we have, our marine debris teams that get out and do cleanups in, tough remote locations like Cocos Keeling Islands and Ningaloo and, Christmas Island, and working in northeast Arnhem Land with the Dimmeroo Indigenous Rangers up there, protecting critical sea turtle nesting habitat and sacred country. And then any threats to vulnerable and endangered species. So our campaigns and our mandate has to fit within those criteria. And we're very, hard on ourselves in when we take on a campaign, we want to deliver a tangible outcome and result. And we are. We're more effective in the last probably 5 or 6 years than we've been in the previous 30 plus years. It's pretty remarkable what we're doing.
Why do you think that is? Do you have an idea what's helping the effectiveness now?
I think it's, looking at those key threats and realising that how we come together on those, but also with the ending of whaling freed up a lot of our time and resources to be able to look at other options. But also, after whaling, we went down to the Southern Ocean and looked at the Patagon Antarctic toothfish poachers, or Chilean sea bass poachers. And, one of the vessels we chased was the Thunder. And we found that, it had an Interpol purple notice out for it. We chased that vessel for 11,000 nautical miles through 3 oceans, and we were reporting its position to Interpol and various countries in the hope that if it came into a country's waters, it would detain it. And in the end, the captain of the Thunder sunk his own ship, and then we then rescued the crew or took them into the authorities, and they got 3 years jail and 15 million euros in fines. But from those discussions and realising that one of the countries that said they would arrest the Thunder if it came in its waters was Gabon, and that led to discussions with Gabon in West Africa, realised they couldn't patrol their entire economic exclusion zone. They only had a small coast guard. And we said, well, we've got the ships, the mostly volunteer crew, and the fuel. Let's partner up. And we realised that if we're going to tackle illegal fishing, which so much of it happens in some countries' coastal waters, the way to do that is to partner up with governments. So we don't have the authority, they do. We've got the tools. And that's meant we now have 8 government partnerships in Africa. We've facilitated the arrest of over 70 illegal fishing vessels. In places like Liberia, the artisanal fishermen can see the fish coming back for the first time in decades. Gabon's increasing their marine parks and marine sanctuaries because of our partnership work. They're banning the use of live fish aggregating devices, which means that the fishermen are no longer allowed to set their nets around whales and whale sharks because the fish congregate around these animals. And then that's flowing on and on for more and more work. And I think also with our marine debris work, it's, you know, it started by a couple of volunteers, and that's just growing strength and numbers. And people are saying, well, this is good work. And you know, companies like Cliniko, they're going, can actually see those tangible outcomes. And yeah, we're not spending a huge amount on PR and marketing, but you can see through meeting us and seeing that transparency. I run Sea Shepherd from a donated office desk in Fremantle. You can see those outcomes. And we think about everything down the line too. We think about our merchandise is eco-ethical, non-sweatshop, organic cottons and dyes. All of our ships are plant-based. All of our events are plant-based food. So we think about everything down the line. I think that there's an element of trust in the brand and what we do. And I think that's we may not have grown rapidly, but we've grown, I think, more sustainably with a more loyal support base, I hope.
Absolutely. So coming back to the Thunder that you mentioned, because I know that was like a massive chase. Were you involved in that mission yourself personally?
I wasn't on the ship, but being one of the global directors, I was, in daily contact with Captain Peter Hammerstead and the crew and the ships. And I guess my role there was, prior to launching that campaign to tackle the Bandit 6, I was in Hobart as part of a key witness for a Senate inquiry into the Southern Ocean. And we talked about whaling, and we also talked about that we were looking at toothfish poaching in the Southern Ocean. And there was a guy there from Austral Fisheries, one of the Western Australia's leading, it's one of Australia's big fishing companies that do legal toothfish operations, fishing in the Southern Ocean, long-lining. And he said, look, it had been mostly cleaned up. You're probably not going to find anything down there. But within 2 days of reaching the searching grounds, we found the most notorious vessel, the Thunder. And then I got introduced via this fellow to the head of Austral Fisheries in Western Australia, and I met David Carter, who's the CEO. And I said, look, people often have perceptions on Sea Shepherd, and once they meet us, it goes out the window. And he put his hand up and he said, guilty as charged. He thought we were just a bunch of cowboys and going to get out there and do some crazy tactics and all for media and PR. But through meeting myself and learning about the campaign, which he was regularly updated on the position of the Thunder, we realised that they had also, as a company, had done a lot of work to tackle illegal fishing over the years as well, because at one point there was as many illegal boats in the Southern Ocean going after toothfish as legal ones. He's worked with government. And then we realised that they had a vessel that was leaving Norway en route to Mauritius, and it could rendezvous and join the chase. So we had, the Thunder, which was wanted by Interpol, 2 Sea Shepherd vessels, and an industry ship from Austral. And that features in the documentary Chasing Thunder. So that was, I guess, my role in the campaign, which really sent a big message around the world of conservation and industry joining to tackle the common enemy. I think that's a good outcome.
Absolutely. So I'm wondering, with this Chasing the Thunder, you mentioned they're wanted by Interpol. What happens when, the person you're chasing is going to be desperate? Because no doubt you documenting them, catching them, whatever might happen, is going to have a very bad result for them. So, like, what are you worried about, in the safety of people on your team, your ship, things like this? Like, what can or does happen in a situation where maybe they just need to do whatever they can to, to avoid getting caught?
Yeah, well, it's a mix of, people over the years that are definitely very desperate. And, with the thunder chase, we had times where they were throwing metal bolts and chains at our crew. So, trying to keep our crew safe and just, stay within the ships as much as we can. So that's really important. But yeah, and I guess with the Thunder, it was a bit of a dicey situation because when they sunk their own ship, we're like, okay, you've put your life rafts overboard. Is everything okay?
Yep.
Yeah, we're abandoning your ship. Is this your Mayday? Oh, yeah, we're putting out a Mayday. Like, these guys had booked their flights a week in advance from South Domain and Principe. They knew exactly what they were doing. And so we were very cautious and concerned about that. So we had to really make sure when they came on board, they were searched. They were separate. There was a separate area for them on the ship.
Yep.
And then, taking them to South Domain and Principe, which were then met with the Coast Guard. So yeah, there is those times over the years where it can be a bit scary, and especially in places like in Africa now, where sometimes we're operating in an area where there are pirates and piracy, and so, but in terms of it's Sea Shepherd ships, crew, but we'll have armed local authorities on our ships, so armed Gabonese or armed Liberian Coast Guard on our ships. Sometimes we may even put out anti-boarding spikes and barbed wire on our ships. And so we have had a couple of times where we've been approached by pirates, and they see, armed Coast Guard and, anti-boarding spikes on our ships, and they turn away. So, yeah, I guess we do everything we can to minimise, risk, and we're still delivering outcomes. And we've been going now since 1977. We've never caused an injury on either side, and we've got a pretty unblemished record there. So
that's fantastic. I didn't realise that you did have that clear record. That's impressive after all this time. I wanted to ask back a little bit on the whaling. So a couple of points with it. One is you made mention that you managed to get whaling made illegal there in that region. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it wasn't us that made it illegal. It was 1986. There was a global moratorium on commercial whaling, but there was a loophole with scientific whaling saying you could take a certain amount for science. And the area that we're talking about off Antarctica, there's different zones. So there's the French and New Zealand, there's the Australian, and the Humane Society International, joining with EDO, took Japan to the federal court and saying that what Japan's whaling was doing was illegal in Australian federal law. So that was, what we provided there, which was when we saw evidence of them still hunting whales in the Australian Antarctic territory, that evidence was then taken Japan to the federal court again and found them in contempt of the court. But it was the Australian and New Zealand governments that sent a customs vessel to the Southern Ocean to document Japan's whaling, and in 2008, I believe. And then that evidence was then used in The Hague in the International Court of Justice, which then found Japan's scientific program to be illegal, which was a huge outcome. So I guess our role there is providing evidence at times with the federal court, where we were able to film one point whales being killed in the Australian Antarctic territory, but then also keeping that pressure on the Australian and New Zealand governments to continue in that push to the International Court of Justice by harnessing support from the Australian public and bringing those images and footage to the front line. Being a bit of a thorn in the side, unfortunately, for the Australian government, because they talked really tough coming into election, especially in opposition, about what they were going to do, but it never resulted.
Yeah. You mentioned this International Court of Justice, which I kind of wondered as well about, what jurisdiction some of these places are in. And I'll be honest, my knowledge of international waters mostly comes from The Simpsons, where they went and had a party out in international waters to avoid some laws. But what I'm wondering, is there any place where there is no jurisdiction or no law governing it? Are there places where people can just go fish illegally, whatever, or is it all covered by something, and what countries or what, people get involved to protect it?
Yeah, so each country generally has a territorial waters, which is about 12 nautical miles, I think, off the coast. Then you have an exclusive economic exclusion zone, which goes out to 200 nautical miles, and then after that, it's international waters. And like you said, it's a free for all. So these are, I guess, the good and bad of that is, the bad is that they can get away with whatever they like. There's lots of links between illegal fishing and slavery, and people just going missing out to sea. But a lot of the biodiversity and the marine life is found generally near land, near your updwellings of nutrients, and where you've got deep sea canyons, and then the cold water coming up, and you've got nutrients in places like the Galapagos and all these areas. So a lot of these places are protected, or have the ability where countries can protect their waters, but a lot of them don't have the tools to be able to do that. So especially in some of these countries, these poorer countries of the world. So we recently did a couple of years ago, there was the Chinese distant water fishing fleet was observed off the Galapagos, and sitting in international waters, but effectively sitting between mainland Ecuador and Galapagos. And in both areas, sharks were protected in the Galapagos, and you got whale sharks and hammerheads and all this incredible array of marine life. But the Chinese fishing fleet was just sitting off there, which was nothing illegal, but morally pretty bankrupt.
Yep.
And so recently we sent out the Ocean Warrior to document what this fishing fleet was up to, and it was hundreds of the Chinese fishing fleet squid boats, and the documentary is called Distant Waters, and we had Associated Press on board. And you look at at night time going out, and all across the horizon was just lit up with all the squid boats. And the other thing that the fleet were doing, were putting out, so one vessel was putting out multiple identification signatures. So one vessel was putting out the ID of a Coast Guard helicopter from some other country, like just complete and blatant illegality. But the other alarming aspect of that was the crew. Some of the crew that spoke to us on these fishing vessels were saying, we want to get off the ship. We don't like the captain. He's not nice to us. We want to get off. And what's the situation like with COVID? Has it reached the United States yet? Like, these people have been out to sea for so long and no ability to get home. And that's the other sad part about slavery, with illegal fishing and slavery, is that there's cases of people leaving. They're in their country. A ship comes into port. They meet the captain. He seems like a nice man. They say, "Hey, you want to come out to sea and earn some money?" And you think, "Oh yeah, I'll go away and I'll come back to the wife and kids with some money, and we'll get ahead." And then he gets out on the ship, and it's like, you want to live, you want to eat, you've got to work. Yep. And there's cases of people being out to sea for up to 5 years.
How does Sea Shepherd handle that, where you have I guess somewhat specific mandate that you're there for the environment, you're there to protect the oceans, and then you're out on maybe a discovery mission or something like this, where something's up, you don't know what, and then you encounter slavery or something that's not exactly what you're there to do, and perhaps even, I guess, a question of how do you go about spending your time if you're working with donors and volunteers that have come up for a specific reason, but then you find something else that wasn't what you're intending?
Yeah, well, it's a case-by-case basis. Obviously with the links to slavery, and we would report all that with the Chinese distant water fishing fleet on what's going on to various governments and organisations that can do more in that space. It's we're not specialised in that area, but it doesn't mean we turn a blind eye to it. Places where we can directly get involved, we do. Like, there was a vessel that I think of was Liberia recently. That a cargo vessel or a ferry, from memory, and it wasn't supposed to be operating because it was not in a good state, and it took on water and it was going down, and so it was a search and rescue. So we diverted all our plans to be there, which is the law of the sea. You've got to help, and we managed to find some survivors, but not all, and that was once again very sad part of some of the work we do when we're there was young children that weren't found, which is then we have to look at that aspect for our crew, or mental health and well-being, which is really tough with those situations. There was one case in the Southern Ocean where we were down there looking for the Japanese whaling fleet, and I think it was called the Berserk, which was a Norwegian yacht, some young adventurers from Norway, and there'd been some big seas and storms, and it had gone had trouble. The New Zealand Navy, I think it was the Wellington, was looking for this vessel, and we were also looking as well. We basically, at one point, the New Zealand Navy had lost a couple of life rafts, and seas were that bad they had to turn back, but we continued on the pursuit, and even went into some of the bases in Antarctica to see if some of the small huts, maybe some of these guys managed to get ashore, and but in the end we couldn't find it. We got official commendation from New Zealand Maritime, Search and Rescue Maritime. However, one of the New Zealand ministers attacked us for going ashore without getting permission. But we got a lot of good PR in New Zealand, in Norway, for trying to help these Norwegians, but unfortunately they were lost at sea. So yeah, it's part of the job. You do what you can, and with the mandate that life is precious, no matter what.
Yeah, you mentioned the sort of mental health and well-being of your crew. As far as the crew goes, like there's people from Sea Shepherd, the organisation, and there's volunteers. There's like roughly how many people do actually work at Sea Shepherd, maybe in Australia and around the world, and what sort of numbers of volunteers do you get if you have those numbers?
Yeah, Australia, we've got about 12 full-time and part-time staff, so a mix of part-time and full-time staff. I'd say right now we definitely need more because our marine debris campaigns, one part-timer and one full-timer, and they're doing a huge amount. Our fundraising team's only one person at the moment, so we definitely need to build more capacity in the team. I guess over the years, Sea Shepherd's been able to do what we do on a very lean budget because of our volunteers, our strength of our volunteers. I ran it as a volunteer for 2 years because we just didn't have the funds. And I did pretty much every role that we have now in Sea Shepherd. I did as a volunteer, and until we could build it up to the point that we're able to have some paid staff now. Our volunteers, so we have about 20 plus outreach chapters around Australia, a mix of volunteers that get out, raise funds and awareness and sell merchandise and do school talks. And then we have our cleanup teams as well that do regular beach cleanups. They've removed millions of bits of marine debris and trash, and involved in remote cleanups where we'll pay for getting them to these locations, pay for their food. Our ship's crew, about 80% of them are unpaid. They've got food and board on board. So yeah, it's a real mix, and they're a passionate bunch, and really, I remember being on the front lines in Antarctica and on the Steve Irwin vessel, and you're getting paid nothing, but you're working like you're getting paid $1 million an hour because it's just passion. And I remember having some people from National Geographic spend a few days on the ship and say, in today's world where it's all about me, what can I get? It's so refreshing to see a bunch of people that it's all about what can they give. And as we all know, that when you give, you get so much more back. And be that environment, animals, or humanitarian, it's there's no shortage of work for people to help.
Yeah. The people that are out on the ships, the volunteers, do they have I don't even know what the phrase is, boating backgrounds, or is this something that they they already have the technical skill to be out there to help with the ship?
Well, my first time out to sea was down in Antarctica, so there you go.
That was your first mission?
It was my first time ever out to sea, straight down to Antarctica, and I just learnt on the job. So there'd be a number of key people in each area that then train up the newbies. So, bosun in charge of the deck crew, and you learn the ropes, be that in port before the ship departs, the captains and the first officers, and then you've got your quartermasters, which was my role, and you just learn on the job. So many people have gone out to sea with no skills or qualifications and just learnt as they've gone, and pretty remarkable what you pick up. We had one guy join and he was a cook, and in the end he became one of our captains and got all these tickets. So it's what you make it, and I think one of the big ticket items that we look for is passion and dedication. And from that, people will learn anything,
I got to come back to this Antarctica one now. I'm even more intrigued because I've watched your TED talk where you mentioned a little bit about this Antarctic Commission, and particularly how you basically were instrumental in changing course. This is the same mission, right? Where you were instrumental to change course and what direction that your ship should go to find this whaling factory. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was pretty much it. So we were in the Southern Ocean, and we had recently found the whaling fleet in about an area which had about 30% ice consistency. So a bunch of chunks of ice everywhere. So the ice was melting, algae, krill. So large concentrations of whales mean the whaling fleet were in that vicinity. But then we had lost them due to changes in weather, etc. And then we had I think a cruise ship had tipped us off on a location that they'd found them and a direction. So we were kind of heading towards that location. And I was in the bridge and I was like, we're heading to this spot, but if you look that was at this time, that was their heading. You look down here on the map, you look at we're looking at the ice charts and looking at the weather. I'm like, if I was a Japanese whaling fleet, this is where I'd be. I'd be in this location. And I felt it gone through it in my head, and I'm engineering, good at maths, and so I guess I looked at the logic of it, and I felt like I was going to be physically sick unless I got it off my chest. So I called in the first mate. I explained my reason. I said, look, I don't care if you don't do what I say. This is my reason as to why I think we're heading in the wrong direction. And he went, okay. So he got Paul Watson, and Paul come out of his cabin, and I explained it to him, and he said, okay, let's change course. We changed course, and I was kind of caught up in the moment. I was running on adrenaline and, shaking a bit, and I stood back and thought, oh my God, what if I was wrong? All the people that had got us to this position, donors, supporters, all the work, what if I was wrong? But luckily, in a short amount of time, we had 2 targets on the radar. Looked like they were sitting in the fog trying to take us away from our position. And I thought they've got to be, the harpoon ships acting as decoys trying to take us away. And I said, no, I believe as a factory whaling ship, we just need to keep on the course we're headed. And then we had a much larger target on the radar. And then 8 hours later, after chasing, we lost one engine, got the engine back on, almost lost them. And then, I remember the photographer on board with a big zoom lens taking a photo of this structure coming in and out of the fog, which was, saw the photo, and I can still see it, the structure of the Nishin Maru, the factory whaling ship, and that meant that we were on them and whaling had been ended. And that was, I remember as we come up on the factory whaling ship, the second mate at the time, Peter Hammerstead, said if I'd do the honour of launching the Jolly Roger flag up on the bow of the Steve Irwin as we come up on the whaling fleet. So I remember I got back to Melbourne, and my dad sent me a text, Mum and Dad sent me a text which said 500 more whales coming up the coast this year because we acted. It was, a pretty special thing.
That's like I said, I heard this story before, and it's amazing the result that was achieved with that mission. And I'd heard that you'd been bold enough to say, hey, I've just got this feeling. What I didn't know was it's your first time out on a ship. And I love the idea of you going up and being like, look, it's my first time here. You've all probably done this a lot of times. Don't worry, I have an engineering background. This is the way we should head off.
Yeah, I guess when you take steps in another direction in your life that's the right path, the energy flows and things just happen, and you learn to trust your gut more and just go with it. I think that's definitely part of it. The ability to just ride the wave and just keep going for it. So absolutely.
Yeah. Now I've got a few questions that are coming up from in the chat. So one question is, what does Sea Shepherd do to disarm people threatening the ocean? So it's probably, a broad one, but I think that it ties in a little bit as well to this whaling thing. Like, it's one thing to stop them in the moment, but how are you actually really stopping them?
Yeah, well, it's a mix. So, sometimes the only weapon we have is the camera. Because, for instance, the Western Australian shark cull, it was all approved by the WA government. So all we could do there was take photos and expose the insanity of it. And in the end, that led to, we took the government to court. The EPA had 30,000 plus submissions, and in the end, the government stopped the shark cull. If you're talking about, illegal fishing in off Africa, we don't have the authority to make the arrests, so we partner up with governments that do, and they can actually physically go on and inspect these vessels, and if their licenses, if they have no license, or they're putting down that they got 3 sharks as bycatch when it was more like 100, then they can actually detain these vessels and fine them and charge them. And in terms of the Japanese whaling fleet, yeah, it's, we couldn't physically arrest them, but what we could do is simply, document what they were doing, block their operations as long as no one got hurt or injured, and effectively keep the pressure on until, the David and Goliath battle was won, where they, no longer hunt whales in the Southern Ocean. So, and the plastics one, well, that's tough because, we still have plastic production set to increase. Oil and gas see it as another opportunity to increase their production with the plastic industry, which is choking our oceans, and it's impacting human health as well, because plastic, is absorbs all the toxic chemicals that we're put out there. But the climate one, we've had some incredible success in the Great Australian Bight, where BP wanted to drill for oil in the Bight in waters deeper and rougher than and more remote than in the Gulf of Mexico. So I led 2 expeditions there on the Steve Irwin to showcase the beauty of the region, which is just nature on a grand scale: southern right whale nurseries, blue whales, humpbacks, minkies, Australian endangered sea lions. The places, offshore islands are on par with the Galapagos. And BP wanted to drill for oil there, and if there was a spill, it would affect much of southern Australia. So that expedition then had been very much a voyage of discovery and to bring the Bight into the homes of Australians and people around the world, that this is what is at stake if we have a spill here, and this is how wrong it could go. And since 2016 of that expedition, we've now had all big oil pull out of drilling for oil in the Bight: BP, Chevron, and Equinor. So that's great for climate and great for the Great Australian Bight, and we look at a bigger protection piece there. So it's being imaginative, it's being creative, with how can we still get the outcomes based on the campaign that we're up against.
Yep. I think they're really good examples, and I think it's something that, people that don't really dive into what you do maybe aren't aware of, the long-term result that you're getting from these missions. It's not a matter of, chase a ship for a little while and stop them while you're there. It's also actually getting a real change that lasts long term in these places, which I think is important, and maybe unless people have really, looked around at what you got up to, might not realise that's what you're achieving there.
Yeah, well, it's when you can stand at the Bunda Cliffs, which, 100 metres vertical drop, stretching for 100 kilometres long, and look out and see turquoise ocean, southern right whale nursery, where you can see 50, 60 mother and calf pairs with the naked eye, and know that those whales are now safe. That's big legacy stuff,
Absolutely.
and it's not just, I want the team at Cliniko to realise that this isn't just my victory, our staff, our volunteers, our crew. This is everyone, the team at Cliniko, to feel part and empowered in these victories as well, because that's what we need. We need empowerment. We need people to take ownership in these wins. Absolutely.
That's perfect lead on to another question that came through, actually. So someone had asked, how much has Cliniko donated to Sea Shepherd so far, and what sort of activity has that supported? Now, I don't know if you have that number available. I probably should and do not. But I'm not sure if you're aware how much we've given, and if you are, we're happy to share. And then what sort of things that would have actually done so far. Because I think that a big part of the charitable donation we do from Cliniko is we're taking a portion of our subscriptions that we receive. We're taking 2% of it to give towards charity. And really, I think it's like good for the people using Cliniko and paying us those subscription fees to actually know and be able to see where their money is going to, because we're really doing it on their behalf.
Yeah, I think we're in over around $75,000 now, Joel, with Cliniko and yourself and the team. And I mean, I think my favourite conversation that we had was when I was sitting in Williamstown on board the Steve Irwin, and we had to raise $150,000 to take the Steve Irwin to the Bight, and the engines were running on the Steve Irwin, and you know, I called you up and said, the campaign is real now, Joel.
Yeah.
It's really happening because of you and your team's support. We're off we go, and I was very, I guess, you know, there's always an element of doubt and nerves when you think, God, I'm leading this expedition. You know, are we going to get good outcomes? Is everyone going to be safe? You know, and then you deliver these results, which is all big oil out of a massive marine wilderness area. So, you know, I think that's where the journey started with us, and now it's just grown from strength to strength. You know, cleaning up Australia's beaches, you know, and the work that, you know, the funding that you provide. It's, you know, you look at Sea Shepherd Australia's role. We have our work with marine debris and climate and sharks and all the other work we do with Australian sea lions that are now listed as endangered. We fund work in Papua New Guinea, protecting hawksbill and endangered green turtles from poachers there. We pay for local rangers there. But we also, Sea Shepherd Australia funds a number of key global roles, like our technical superintendent for our ships, our global media director. We pay for all of our ships' insurances, you know, all those sorts of things as well. So when you're not only helping the work in Australia and our coastlines here, and our marine life here, but you're also helping it at a global scale as well. So, you know, and that's, you know, we're on the blue planet. So yeah, and we're able to operate the way that we do because, you know, I work out of a donated office space in Fremantle. We have a company called UDLA, Urban Design Landscape Architects. I met one of the directors. I said, look, I'm looking for a place to work from. He goes, here's your free desk. I'm like, I'm the managing director of the organisation. I'm one of the 6 global directors. And I work from a donated office desk. Yeah. So that means that when, you know, you guys, Cliniko, help us, most of it goes straight towards the front line. So, and we pride ourselves on that, absolutely.
It was definitely a big contributing factor to us getting involved with Sea Shepherd as well, is just like knowing the effectiveness of the donations to your organisation is important to us. Another question that we did have come through was, as far as the whaling goes and getting the big changes in the whaling down around the Antarctic, things like that, how do you know that people aren't back there doing what they shouldn't do again? Like, what kind of monitoring happens? Who takes care of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Japanese whaling fleet, they always made a big, you know, hoo-ha and, you know, celebration whenever they would leave Japan to go down to the Southern Ocean to hunt whales. So there was that. There's always activists or other organisations like, you know, in Japan that are monitoring the whaling fleet as well. But also, you know, there would be people out there that would, you know, have access to satellite imagery and to be able to notify us as well if anything was happening in that regard. You know, ships do put out AIS, or automatic identification signatures, give us their speed, their course, their heading, their location. But if vessels are up to no good, they just turn that off. So, but in terms of the Japanese whaling fleet, we're very confident that they're not down there. And there's other parties down there as well that if they saw them, they'd be reported, be that cruise ships or other commercial fishing vessels.
That makes sense. Another question I have, I don't know who this regulation is, but does Sea Shepherd get involved with regulation BETW, overfishing and illegal fishing? I don't know what that is.
I'm not sure what that means myself either. We just work with the governments, and you know, we provide information and intel to Interpol. Interpol don't have any ships. We're the only ones out there with the ships, and we provide that information to them. And then, you know, those countries arrest as well. I guess there's, you know, other organisations that maybe look at, you know, global you know, stats on links with slavery and links with illegal fishing. I know there's organisations in Australia that are also looking at a better rating system so that when you know, seafood does arrive in Australia, that there is almost like a rating system on whether it is linked to illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing and slavery and whatnot. So there's still a lot of work to be done in that space.
Sure. I have another question for you. Like you have a lot of operations on the go. You have a number of ships there, and I see like there's an operation like Operation Apex Harmony, which has a fantastic name. And then I was kind of wondering who comes up with these names for your operations. Do you have sometimes you end up with an operation that's just got like a terrible name and no one's buying the merchandise for it, or how does that come about?
Often it's the campaigners that come up with the ideas for the campaign. So, yeah, Apex Harmony, it was, the protection when the West Australian government launched their shark cull in a means to keep our beaches safer, which, we knew that was going to have no impact, and apart from a disastrous impact on marine life, when killing sharks, be that nets, drumlines, or, just culls, is proven scientifically and through past trials that does nothing for public safety. And so, we look at the idea with the Apex Harmony campaign was, they're an apex predator. We need to live in harmony with them because they maintain, our oceans' health. They're the doctors of the oceans. They remove the sick and the weak, and places where sharks have been removed, you're seeing complete collapse of ecosystems, sick coral reefs. And so then the campaign logo had to have, sharks in it and a human element, and then a hook threatening to pull the shark out and destroy the balance. And with the Great Australian Bight campaign, as the first start of that, we worked with Bunna Lorry, a Merning elder and a whale songman from off the Bunda Cliffs there, and headed a bight. And he can communicate with whales. He's a pretty amazing fella, Uncle Bunna Lorry. And so I sat down with Peter Owen, the head of Wilderness Society South Australia, and Uncle Bunna and myself, and we talked about the campaign, and we talked about the expedition with the Steve Irwin. And Bunna told us the story of Jeddah, the white whale, and how Jeddah had breathed life, gone into the Bight and breathed life into the sea, into the land, and, all the animals that go there, the blue whales, the humpbacks, the minkies, they go there to honour the journey of the great white whale Jeddah, a southern right whale, white whale. And so we named it Operation Jeddah with Bunna's permission. And then with the campaign logo, I wanted very much, as much as we could, the Indigenous colours. So it had the white whale, had the turquoise ocean, the Bunda Cliffs, which is, the huge cliffs off the bottom of Australia. Looks like Antarctica broke off and drifted away. And lo and behold, we're at Head of Bight on the expedition, there with Uncle Bunna Lorry. Bunna Lorry's on the edge of the cliff. We're wearing our Sea Shepherd T-shirts with the Jeddah logo on the back, which has got the white whale, the Bunda Cliffs, and the turquoise ocean. And Bunna's on the edge of the cliff with his clapsticks and singing in, and the whales are coming in, and he had a mother southern right whale and a calf sitting right in front of him while we're all there, and it all came, to one point. We're like,
that is amazing.
you couldn't script this, it was just phenomenal. And I've seen some things with Bunna, and there's a thing about First Nations and First Australians and Aboriginal people, when they talk about connection to country and to the land and the sea, it's another level. They are deeply connected, like that film Avatar. Those who have seen that, there is a real deep connection there, and I've seen it. I remember being in Whale Beach in the northern beaches of Sydney with Bunna. We both left the house together. We walked down to the beach together. I seen exactly what Bunna had seen. We stood on the sand, and he said, "There's a big group of dolphins out there today." And I went, and I couldn't see any. And I was like, "Okay." He goes, "No, there's a really big group of dolphins out there." And about 5 minutes later, we're standing walking along the beach, and this big pod of dolphins come through. I'm like, it's just.
Yep.
It's the only thing I can sort of explain it in is, that they've tapped into it at another level. They're still deeply connected. And it's a bit like how sometimes we can be out in the garden and think about someone we haven't thought of for 2 or 3 years, or spoken to someone, and next thing the phone rings and it's them. I think there's so much of the human psyche that we've kind of lost,
See, I think that's like absolutely that's true. But now we get to a point where everyone just blames the phone for listening in. Like, you know, you say something, you think of something, and all of a sudden you're seeing some ads for it, and it's like we're blaming technology. But I agree with you, and that sounds like amazing experiences to have.
Yeah, I mean, the journey's been, you know, as I said, look, you know, some of my talks I say, you know, take a step on board with Sea Shepherd. You know, you never know where this journey may lead you. It may just change your life. You may just change the world. You just don't know where it's going to end up. You know, the places I've been, the people I've met, you know, be that rock stars or celebrities, and you're talking about conservation. You're not talking about, oh, what movie you're doing or whatever. And that's a lovely thing that there's a lot of people out there in different sectors that care. You know, people don't want to see the planet destroyed. You know, and it's about us working together to make this planet a better place for our kids.
Yep, for sure. I have a question that came in advance of this. This was from Sam, who is 10 years old and either our youngest customer or perhaps related to someone that uses Cliniko. And they'd asked about disarming ships, which we've already talked about, but also what you feel like is your greatest accomplishment with Sea Shepherd.
Yeah, what was the young fella's name? Sam. Well, yeah, great question, Sam. Yeah, it's not an easy one, but for me, I guess it's definitely that first wild defence campaign and making those calls, and then backing myself to be able to then, you know, find the entire Japanese whaling fleet and saving over 500 whales. You know, and then there's been the work in the Bight, you know, a massive, you know, big intact marine wilderness area that is now free from oil and gas, and to now go to places like Pearson Island, which is on par with the Galapagos, where the welcoming party is Australian endangered sea lions, and know that with all those rock crevices and that if there was an oil spill there, we wouldn't be able to clean that up because it's just hard to reach there.
Yep. But
to know that those Australian endangered sea lions are now safe, they can have their young for generations and generations to come. Yeah, the fights may continue, but to know that they're safe for now, it's the big legacy stuff that I really sometimes forget, and I think these conversations are a great reminder of the work together that we've achieved.
Yeah, for sure, and I think it's got to be you know, I find it so valuable to hear these stories, and you know, a lot of times if you're donating somewhere or get involved with something, you know, it can be a little bit of a black box, and to really just like hear these stories and know exactly what's happening on the other side and what's happening from it is inspiring. On that topic as well, I guess you know, will be people listening that are like, all right, this is pretty important, and maybe they haven't been involved so far. And what sort of ways would you encourage if they wanted to get involved with Sea Shepherd, or you know, support Sea Shepherd, or it could just be, I guess, your top tips for some life changes people could make that, you know, you see from your experience out there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, that question. I mean, I think one of the key things that I recently spoke to some school kids about was that, you know, I was living a lie in doing the job that I was doing, and it was slowly eating away at me. And I looked at Steve Irwin's life and I thought, you know, he lived to be only 44 years old, and he died young, but he led a full and passionate life. And I thought, what's the point in living to be 100 and do something you hate? You know, get out there and live the life you dreamed and imagined, and the only one that's stopping you from doing it is yourself. So take the steps. It may be, you know, you might start volunteering in something or chipping away at, you know, a couple of hours a week at something, but at some point you'll be able to get on the path, and you don't have to decide exactly what you want to do or do exactly what you want to do and do it cold turkey. You might just go a bit of this, bit of that, and you think, oh, that's kind of it, but maybe not. And in the end, you'll find your path, because we're a long time dead, you know.
Yeah.
And in terms of making a difference, well, there's so much that we can do as consumers, the choices we make every day, support, you know, local businesses and companies, and, you know, definitely, you know, plant-based diets, good for you, good for yourself, good for the planet. And then, you know, get involved with a charity or a group. Start your own. You know, if you see a niche on, you know, there's stuff that's not being done, there's a void, there's no shortage of work to do. Get involved with Sea Shepherd and a clean-up, or donate or support. or it may be orangutans is your thing, or rhinos, or whatever. Just there's so much to do, or helping kids and children. There's no shortage of help that's needed out there, and I guarantee you'll get back tenfold what you give. But the other element of that is a word of caution is that it's a bit of slippery slope, this stuff, and there's a lot of bad images and stories out there of what's going on. Be aware of it, but don't feed your soul that stuff every day. So don't sit online watching all that negativity. Be aware of it, but by doing something about anything, you'll stop complaining about the problems of the world, because you're actually doing something about it. And that's what my now partner said to me, is like, well, yeah, you're complaining about all these issues, but what are you doing about it?
Yep.
And now that I'm doing something about it, I no longer complain, because you're actually doing something. And get out and still enjoy nature, because there's still so much beauty. Like where you live, Joel, in Healesville, no matter, even if you're in a city, look up at a tree and look at the sky and feed your senses nature, because that's what heals us, and that's what inspires us, and that's what gives us energy to continue. So, and as the saying goes, always take time for yourself every day. Try and do something for yourself every day, because fill your own cup first and let the world benefit from the overflow. So, I ride and run and do things like that, and do painting and art. So you've got to have balance in your life, because if your life is just one thing, conservation or whatever, and stuff isn't going wrong there, your whole world falls apart. But if you've got conservation and family and art or sport and all these things, if something's not going well in one of them, you've still got all these other elements to keep you whole and keep you strong. So, it's really important.
Thank you for that. A lot of that resonates with me. I think particularly the mention about you can obviously read a lot of bad online, and probably just focusing on the things you're actually actioning and doing something about could be a healthier way to go about it. I think we've been going for a while. I should probably let you get going in a minute. I really appreciate so much you taking the time to chat with us about these topics. I find it fascinating. I've been looking forward to this chat for a while, and I hope people that are watching or will watch get something out of it. I assume they can just look up Sea Shepherd if they want to find out more and check out more detail about what you do, or they've got some pretty cool merchandise. You might want to go have a look for that. But mostly, Jeff, thank you. Thanks for the work you're doing, and also joining us for this.
Thanks, Joel, and all the team at Cliniko, and everyone listening in and tuning in. Yes, seashepherd.org.au. You can involve, volunteer, buy some merch, become a monthly giver. But all in all, we've got one planet, and when you strip it all back, regardless of our political parties or race or religion, there's more that unites us and divides us. When we bring our kids into this world, all they need is clean air, clean water, clean food, a livable climate, and love. These are the things that bind us and connect us across this beautiful planet. So let's work together.
It's a great one to finish on. Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And of course, we'll let people know if we've got other live events coming up. Thanks, everyone.